Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hari Gopi Janavallabha Girivara Ahaya Jai Gopi Janavallabha Girivara Ahaya Yasodhanandana Bhajajahanjaya Yasodhanandana Bhajajahanjaya Jamunatira Hevana Jahiyam Jamunatira Hevana Jahiyamuna Jaya Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Jai Gopi Janavallabha Girivara Gopi Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivara Giri Yasodhanandana Bhajajahanjaya Yasodhanandana Bhajajahanjaya Yamunatira Hevana Jahiyamuna Jamunatira Hevana Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hari Bol Hey Rama Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Ego, hey, Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Om. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Nitai Gaur, hey, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Nitai Gaur, hey, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bho, Hari Bho, Hari Bho, Gaur Hari Bho. Nitai Gaur, Hare Bho, Hare Bho, Hare Bho, Hare Bho. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 11, Chapter 23, the Song of the Avanti Brahmana, and this is verses 7 through 10. 7 is on the board. Okay. Gyatayo tishtayastasyaha Vanmatranyapi Muknarchitaha Sunyavastata Atmatpi Kale Kamair Anarchitaha Gyatayo Tishtayastasya Vanmatrenapi Narchitaha Sunyavasata Atmapi Kale Kamar Anarchitaha Gyatayo Tishtayastasya Vanmatrenapi Narchitaha Sunyavasata Atmapi Kale Kamara Narchitaha. Ladies? Anyone else? Gyataya, in the relatives. Atitaya, and guests. Tasya, his. Vakmatrenap, in api, even by words. Na architaha, were not shown respect. Sunya avaste, in his home deprived of religiosity and sense gratification. In his home deprived of religiosity and sense gratification. Atma, himself. Api, even. Kale, at the suitable times. Kamai, with sensory enjoyment. Anarchitaha, not gratified. So now we're hearing about the life of the Avanti Brahman before he renounces everything. In his home, devoid of religiosity and unlawful sense gratification, the family members and guests were never properly respected, even with words. He would not even allow sufficient gratification for his own body at suitable times. Text number 8. Since he was so hard-hearted and miserly, his sons, in-laws, wife, daughter, and servants began to feel inimical towards him. Being disgusted, they would never treat him with affection. Verse number 9. In this way, the presiding deities of the five family sacrifices became angry at the brahmana, who, being niggardly, guarded his wealth like a yaksha, who had no good destination either in this world or the next. or who was totally deprived of religiosity and sense enjoyment. Verse number 10. Tad avyadhyana visrastaha punya sandasya burida. I think this is a little reverberating, a little bit too much. The volume, bring the bass down, the bass is too high. Okay, that's, still it's there. Bring the treble up and the bass down. Hare Krishna. There you go. Okay. Okay. Tad avyanana visrastaha punya sandasya burida arto yagachan nirdanam bhavayasa parishramaha. Translation. O magnanimous Uddhava, by his neglect of these demigods, he depleted his stock of piety and all his wealth. The accumulated of his repeated exhaustive endeavors was totally lost. So Krishna is speaking to Uddhava now. And he's speaking about this brahmana. Purport. The brahmana's stock of piety became like a withered branch that had no longer given fruits or flowers. Srila Jiva Goswami comments that the brahmana had a trace of piety directed at the Supreme Lord with hopes of liberation. That pure portion of the branch of his piety remained unwithered, eventually giving him the fruit of knowledge. Om agyan timidandasya gyanajana salakaya chaksu unmilitam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha Sri Chaitanya manobhistam staptitam yena bhutale swayam rupa kadammayam dadati spapadantikam nama om Vishnu padaya Krishna prasthaya bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami iti namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachadine Nirvisesa Sunyavari Pastyatya De Satarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we're hearing about this brahmana from the province of Avanti. Avanti is in the area of Ujjain. Yeah, that's one of the old names of Ujjain is Avanti. Avanti. So this personality is being talked about by Krishna to Uddhava, and explaining how renunciation, forced renunciation works. This renunciation can be voluntarily accepted due to knowledge or experience, or one can be forced to renounce. Prabhupada talks about that forced renunciation. There's a man, he has a stock of grains on the side of the road, and he's selling his grains, and but then all of a sudden a big strong wind comes, blows his grains up in the sky, and the grains are flying in the sky, and while they're flying he said, "My dear Lord, please accept my offering." That's kind of a renunciation, where you're forced to accept the fact that you can't do anything but renounce. That's not real renunciation. Renunciation has to be voluntary. And we see the situation here of a person who, obviously he had good karma. There's no question about that. We can see that, both in a spiritual sense and also in a material sense. Spiritual sense here, it said that although his material good karma reached the end and everything fell, and because of that he lost everything, still he had a little bit of spiritual karma. In other words, somewhere within his existence, he had the desire to renounce. And that remained, and that gave him some knowledge on how to deal with the situation, and that'll be coming up. But here, speaking about what is being spoken right now, is that this person, and we see in the material world, people have a lot of material things, power, position, wealth, followers, name and fame, so many different accolades coming by pious activities. Nobody gets anything by hard work. Two people work very hard, and one person gets nothing or little, and the other person gets everything. Or one person doesn't work hard at all, and all of everything comes by way of their pious activities in the previous birth, or even in this birth. And the other person struggles, strains, tries so many different ways to somehow acquire some kind of power, position. Still, nothing happens. So destiny is powerful. The only way one can change destiny is one becomes a devotee. Otherwise, destiny is all-powerful. So we see here, people who have such position, but there's one element that's missing, and this was the element here in this person. He was not kind. He wasn't kind. This is the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna has everything, and he controls everything, he owns everything, but he's kind. And because he's kind, we worship him. We don't worship him because he has so many things. Some people do. They want things from God, not God himself, and so they worship God, or they even might adore a great personality in this world in order to get what that personality can give them. And sometimes we used to use the cliche, a person is not your friend, but they're friend with your money. They're more looking at what they can get from what you got rather than being something, some relationship with you. And we see that all the time now. People have positioned themselves in order to get something from others, and there's not much relationship between the individuals. It's the material thing that brings them together, at least temporarily. But if a person is not kind, who cares? But if a person is kind and generous by nature, even if they don't have much, they're desirable. Their association is desirable, their friendship is desirable. So we can see that element of kindness is so, and this was completely absent in this personality here. He didn't care about his relatives, he didn't care about his friends, he followed no rules and regulations, he didn't even care about his own body. He was such a miser. The devotees were telling Prabhupada one story where one man, he had apparently nothing, and he was living in a very poverty-stricken condition, and his house was broken down, and his area was always dirty, and he never had many clothes. But when he died, they found out he had millions of dollars in the bank. He never spent any of it. He was so miserly that he would just deprive himself and others of anything, and it's just like it's kind of like a sickness, a disease. Prabhupada said that happens in India too. He said many of these beggars, they have nice bank balances, big accounts, but they look like they don't have anything. Of course, they have plans for the future. So because he was such, what we say, hard-hearted, cruel, insensitive, and didn't follow any principles of kindness or etiquette that is based on human nature, nobody liked him. Nobody liked him. And gradually, because he neglected the higher powers, didn't offer anything to the demigods depleted his stock of piety, and all his wealth was gone by the power of providence. So everything in the material world, of course, is temporary, and whatever one may have, one may use in the service of others or in the service of the Lord. Otherwise, what value does anything have that one has? If one doesn't use what they have in the service of others or in the service of the Lord, materially or spiritually, then they live a very wretched existence, like that. It says that there are 3 modes of material nature, and people's mentalities are somewhat geared, or what we say, controlled by the type of mode that they are connected with. And how they think and how they live is somewhat facilitated by the mode of material nature. So to use a little bit of a understanding, a person in the mode of ignorance thinks, if I can get something, then I can do something. And if I can do something, then I can be something. So getting becomes the main thing in the mode of ignorance. In the mode of passion, a person thinks, if I can do something, then I can get something, and then I can be something. The person in the mode of goodness thinks, if I can be something, then I can do something, then I can get something. So you see how the modes, actually from ignorance to goodness, is completely reversed, just the mindset like that. So a devotee is somewhat situated in the element of the mode of goodness. It's all about character. It's not about what you have or even what you can do. Because what you can do really depends on what you, either your pious activities in the previous life or by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But character is everything. Therefore, although he had so much, he had no character and didn't care about anybody else. So, and because of that, he lost everything. But still, something was there in his life that brought about some future good fortune. And it says that he had this element of desire for renunciation. Although it was buried amongst all his mean mentality, it was there. And when he lost everything, it became revealed. And so Prabhupada, not Prabhupada, anyway, the devotees of Prabhupada said, eventually the fruit of knowledge somehow fructifies, like that. And we find that here also in the 11th canto, in the story of the 24 gurus, when this verse, I think it's also Krishna speaking about the 24 gurus. And one of the guru is Pingala, the prostitute. And she also showed renunciation in the same way. When she could not facilitate anyone for her services, she became more and more unhappy. And finally, when nothing was actually happening and her whole life economically was falling apart because she simply depended on her profession for her livelihood, and when her profession was no longer facilitated, she felt a sense of loss. But finally, at one point, when she realized that I have nothing and there's nothing I can do about it, she became happy. Same with the Avanti Brahman. He realized that, all right, I don't have anything, but at least I can take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Higher than happiness, people who want to be happy, But don't try to be happy. Try to be satisfied. Satisfaction is greater than happiness because happiness you have to work for, at least in the material sense. And happiness in the spiritual sense comes by way of devotional service. But for the materialist, or even for a devotee, sometimes we see devotees are a little bit unhappy or unsatisfied. But satisfaction comes by accepting whatever Krishna arranges. I remember I was just recently in Italy. It was not so recent. It was in July of this year. And they were cooking prasadam for me every day. And I couldn't eat any of it. They kept asking me, what do you want? And I was telling them, and they were coming up with something every. So lunch every day was like, what am I going to do? So the last day, I thought, all right, maybe we'll get lucky. The last day there'll be something. So the last day was worse than the first 3 days. So when I realized it, I thought, Jai, Krishna, okay, thank you. And when I did that, I mean, I was complaining in my mind, this is not right. And finally I said, all right, this is what you want, Krishna, I'll take it. And I felt, wow, I felt great. Felt this relief came, forced renunciation. But it was a kind of satisfaction that allowed me to accept the situation, even though it apparently was something different than I wanted. Like that. So that this element of satisfaction can be acquiesced or can be brought about at any time. One can be satisfied. And satisfaction is one of the austerities mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita as of the features of the mind. Material world means dissatisfaction. Nobody's satisfied. No matter how much people get or how many things people achieve or do, there's always this dissatisfaction. Prabhupada would say material world means satiation but no satisfaction, and spiritual life means no satiation but it's always satisfied. Always satisfied. Why? Because even though on the external level things may not be what we say ideal, still devotee can always take shelter of Krishna, think of Krishna, and I realize that whatever Krishna arranges is perfect, and there's something in there for me to understand. And so this Avanti Brahmin, now he's got a little bit of knowledge left, although he lost everything. And we'll go on in the future verses to see how intelligent and how wise. So renunciation, or too much attachment to material things, there's a disqualification for actually spiritual life. There's two disqualifications, too little or too much. If one has too little, one cannot maintain their body, and therefore if they cannot maintain their body and their soul nicely, it becomes difficult to perform devotional service. And we see people who have hardly anything, they're mostly struggling to maintain themselves, and it's very hard for them to practice spiritual life, because the most important thing is to maintain. And those who have too much, they become, what we say, overwhelmed or diverted from the path of bhakti, or can never understand the value of bhakti, because they think that having success in material life is something that will bring them happiness. So we have the example of Nala Kuvera and Manigriva in the Damodar prayer. They were so wealthy. How wealthy were they? They were the sons of Kuvera. Who's Kuvera? Kuvera. He's so rich. Not only is he rich, he lends money to Krishna. When Krishna wants to get married, that story of Balaji, the Tirupati. The whole story is that when Bhrigu Muni kicked Lord Vishnu in the chest, Lakshmi became very upset, and she cursed the Brahmins to become poor. And then and not only that, she left the spiritual world and went to the material world. Now Vishnu is without his Lakshmi, so he decides to find Lakshmi. So he incarnates as Srinivas, a poor brahmana. And the whole pastime is Srinivas is trying to catch up to Lakshmi. Finally he does. And then they decide to get together and get married, but he's broke. He's got no money. So he's thinking, what can I do? And then Kuvera sees the situation and offers to lend him some money, but with interest. So that whole Balaji temple now is so rich. Why? They paid the loan, but now they're still paying the interest. So that's why that temple is one of the richest temples in India, because they're paying the interest that Krishna borrowed from Kuvera. There's a nice story connected with that temple. I think you might have heard the story before. One man came into the temple and he had a very valuable diamond ring. And he gave the ring to Balaji. But when the Pujari accepted it, he became a little greedy and stole the ring. Now he stole the ring and he's thinking, what can I do? Now I have to find some place where I can get some money for this ring. But it's too dangerous for me to do it in the area. So he travels 100 kilometers away, finds some little jewelry shop in one small town, walks into the jewelry shop, shows the jeweler the ring, and says, how much will you give me for this? The jeweler says, where did you get that? I gave that to Balaji. Yeah, Krishna led him right where he was supposed to go. Don't try to cheat Krishna. So yeah, but this idea of wealth, there's so many types of what we say opulences that one can somehow or other gain, and one can also be given. So people have various types of opulences, and they become very much enamored by those opulences. Pride, or a kind of pride comes from these opulences. So people are beautiful, and they become proud of their beauty. There was one famous movie star. Her name was Brigitte Bardot. She's still alive. She's almost 100 years old now. But she was famous back in my time when I was a kid. She was popular because of her beauty. And, you know, wherever she would go, and she'd be in magazines and so many things. But one day, when she reached the age of 50, she looked into the mirror and that beauty was fading. And it became such a, what we say, a thunderbolt on her mind. She thought, oh no, everything I'm living for is also now going. I'm getting old. And so she decided not to go out in public anymore. She gave up her whole career because she simply lived for her her bodily beauty. So people become, what we say, proud and think that, oh, but this is the material world. And everything you have is subject to the element of time. So one may have beauty, one may have learning, one may have good birth in a good family, pious family, good name, or one may have wealth. But we learn from the story of Damodar, that pastime, that these two persons, Nala Kuvara and Manigriva, they had so much wealth, but they were proud of their wealth and didn't respect the great soul when he came into their presence. And so Narada Muni gave them a little mercy and took everything away. So Prabhupada writes, in the purports in this particular pastime, out of all the forms of pride that one may have by way of material existence, wealth is the strongest. Wealth is the strongest form of pride. Because people who are wealthy think that they have achieved success, they can do anything, they can go anywhere, they can even, control people by their wealth. So this idea of wealth, so everything has to be used in the service of the Lord, otherwise it becomes the source of one's entanglement in material energy and eventually turns into something different rather than, and we see people who are wealthy, and this is a statistic, are the most, the highest category of people who have mental illnesses. This is a statistic that those who are very wealthy find it very difficult to find happiness. If you're a little wealthy, that's okay. But if you're very wealthy, that's a problem. And one cannot really understand, the Bhagavatam explains that if one has a very big golden crown on their head, it's very hard to bow down. It's very hard to bow down because the weight of the crown will keep you down. So nobody bows down. So therefore, this idea of wealth, and we see here, he had so much that he didn't care about anybody. His wife, his family members, people in general, or even, relatives, no one. So everything was lost. We tell one story. I remember I had to go to one program in a place called Beverly Hills, California. It's one of the richest places in America. People are so rich. So one devotee, he knew all these rich people. So he brought me to this program. And they were like people who were, had some connection with Hollywood, psychologists, psychiatrists, people who were, highly placed. So I'm thinking, how do I preach to these people? If I tell them, you're in Maya. So I told this one story. And the story is that there's one greedy merchant. This is how I started my lecture. And I'm sitting there amongst all these rich people, and they're dressed quite nicely. They were friends of this one person who knew the devotee, so he came because of his friend invited him. So they didn't really have any inclination of what they were going to hear or what they were going to experience. So I told a story. There was one greedy merchant, and he had 4 wives. And now he goes to the doctor. The doctor says, "My dear sir, you have 6 months to live. You have terminal disease. There's nothing that can be done. Modern medicine cannot save you. Make your plans to leave." So he's thinking, and he's, because he's greedy, he's wealthy, he has 4 wives, he's afraid. Now he's very fearful of what's going to happen. He's losing everything. So he goes he has 4 wives. His favorite wife was the 4th wife. His 3rd wife, a little less favorite. 2nd wife, okay, but not so much. And the 1st wife he completely neglected. So he goes to his favorite wife. He says, I'm leaving. Will you come with me?" She said, "Haribo, nice knowing you. That's it, we're finished." So he goes to the 3rd wife. He's begging her, "Please come with me. I'm going. You know how much I love you." She said, "Well, once you die, I'm going to get remarried." So he goes to the second wife, and he's even more desperate, and he's begging her. She said, well, you know, I can come to the grave and see you off when you die. I'll do that. And now there's only the first wife, the one he completely neglected, the one he never talked to, the one he completely, mistreated. And he came to her and said, and he's embarrassed because he knows how he treated her, will you come with me? She said, I'll never leave you. So then I told the story. Who are the four wives? The first wife is the body, the fourth wife. Because when we have to leave this body world, that's the end of the body. The third wife is our possessions. When we die, somebody else gets them. And the second wife are our friends and relatives. They come to the grave, and see us off, and say so many nice prayers. But the first wife is Krishna. So even though so I told this story to all these rich people. And I was thinking, I don't know, I'll take a chance, see what happens. And you know, every one of them appreciated the story. Because later on, they all told me how miserable they were. When we were sitting together in a more relaxed atmosphere after the lecture, and everyone was eating prasadam, they just told me how many times they've been married, and how their present situation is miserable, how much money they got, but it's not working out, they have fights with other people. It's like their whole lives were messed. It was just a mess. So they actually came to this program to see if they could learn something about spirituality that would help them, and which was good. And we find the same thing here. When people can see that the frustration that they have acquired simply by following the way of the world, in other words, trying to somehow or other be successful by material life, and it gives them the complete opposite. Not only does it make them happy, but it makes them miserable. It makes them miserable. Unless they use everything in the service of the Lord, or at least a portion of it. So we see here, somehow or other, we don't know his karma, but he had some sukriti there that was somewhat not destroyed by his, his miserliness and his lack of performing proper worship to the higher devas. That was still there, and that gave him some hope where he could actually move on and actually become happy through devotional service. And I don't want to speak too much because the whole story is yet to be unraveled in the future verses. But this is an interesting lesson. How people become so much attached to their material things that it becomes everything. Material things have value, and that they can support one's body and mind, but they are not the source of happiness. Happiness is relationships. Happiness is relationships. He gave up all the relationships. He sacrificed relationships for material things. And people who have nice relationships with others, and ultimately, of course, the perfect relationship or the ideal relationship, or the desirable relationship is our relationship with Krishna. That's the most important. And when that becomes strong, then every other relationship becomes nice, or becomes a source of happiness, and a source of service also. We can use those relationships as an opportunity to serve Krishna by serving others, through serving Krishna by serving others. And that brings happiness and satisfaction, not having material things. It's nice, and now we can see, I can see it. I've been coming to India since 1994, practically every year, for the last 25 years. And India is moving in the direction of material opulences more and more. But we find, if you follow the statistics, there's more and more difficulties that are coming by way of that. More crime, more drug abuse, more unemployment. People had employment just by way of by nature, but now people have to struggle and be forced to live in big cities and try to find jobs. And so, when spirituality takes a back seat to material progress, and then material difficulties come along with that material progress, and so many things. So therefore, it's our job as devotees to preach this Krishna consciousness, because people still have that sukriti, but they're being led and misdirected by the leaders of the country to think that now, because we have somehow or other not been able to develop economically, we have to focus on that as the most important thing in our life. And economics leads to sense gratification, and sense gratification leads to frustration. Too much. So as devotees, we'll find that there's a lot of potential Avanti Brahmins out there. We can preach Krishna consciousness and explain that actually your real wealth is in your spirituality. This is wealth. We always hear that saying, Radhanath Maharaj uses it occasionally in his lectures. He said, if you lose your money, you lose nothing. You lose your health, you lose something. And if you lose Krishna, there's nothing left. So health is important, but ultimately the ultimate health is spirituality. Okay, so any questions or comments on attachment, detachment, renunciation? Okay. No questions? Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki.